Now, if you travelled up from the Kent coast or anywhere in Kent into London by train from the mid-50s until the mid-2000s, chances are you'll have ridden in one of these at some point. This is the old 4 CEP stock, now all vanished. It was a type of third rail electric train introduced by the then quite young British Railways Board for its expanding third rail network down here in southern England. The Southern Railway before the war had made many, many miles of passenger service electric and had been rather good at doing it. But of course, during the war this work just spluttered to a halt, as they had rather more pressing matters, shall I say, to worry about. So it was left to the BRB to finish the job. And the Kent lines were done in 2 phases. We finished up with slightly more than 120 of these from memory. Now, up until then, the BRB had built some suburban rolling stock for the London suburban services called EPBs, but they were non-corridor and they didn't have loos. Now, for a journey that was going to take 2.5 hours, you had to have better seating, loos, preferably some kind of refreshment car. So these were the results. Some were built with buffet cars, others like this without the buffet car. But because you could walk right through the whole train, you could always go to the buffet car. The CEP designation, as far as I understand it, from when I was on there, C stood for corridor, as it was spelled CEP, and the EP was to do with the braking system. The old pre-war designs used a system called Westinghouse, with 2 air pipes. On these that was stuck to, but magnet valves under each car provided you with a much easier to use brake. And because of course it was electrically actuated, it was very quick to respond. The power equipment was by English Electric and the brakes by Westinghouse. The car bodies and running gear, underframes, all built in the railway's own workshops. You couldn't do that now. I believe the underframes were assembled at Ashford in Kent and then taken by rail to Eastleigh Works in Hampshire to be fitted with the car bodies and all the electric gear. And a friend of mine actually remembers commissioning these things back in the late 50s and early 60s. As built, which this one is, they were painted green. They nearly all had air whistles instead of horns. There were plush seats throughout the whole thing, curtains at all the saloon windows and compartment windows. There were 4 loos on each 4-car set. I think the buffet car sets from memory had a loo for the use of the buffet car crew alone. It's quite a while ago now, that. But by the time we got to the early 80s, there was a little bit of a cloud on the horizon. These things were being run to the Kent coast ports, from where people would get across to France, of course, and the trains the other side were rather newer. There was no money for replacement of these sets. So, that was one thing. The other more pressing thing, though, was blue asbestos. When these were being built, before the interiors were fitted out, the coaches were sprayed with a mixture of blue asbestos and glue. It was a sound deadening and insulation material. Well, we all know what that stuff is, and it had to come out. So, insofar as they were able to, when the sets went to Swindon to be refurbished, they took out all the asbestos they could get at and encapsulated the rest. They also fitted strip lighting, fluorescents, brightening up the interiors somewhat. Completely new interior, which was rather austere really after the originals. But one thing they did do that was a godsend was to install a public address system. So you didn't have to battle your way through a crowded train if anything went wrong anymore. You could just pick up the microphone and tell people what had happened. Well, eventually the health and safety Nazis began to twitter on about these things with their slam doors, of course. And the crash worthiness question came into question, because they're built on a separate steel underframe. And the car body is quite light. It was better than the pre-war designs in a collision, but it was quite light. So eventually the whole fleet was scrapped, bar a very few vehicles, I'm afraid. This particular unit is in preservation. 7105. I can't remember what it ran as in the end, because when they did them up, they didn't renumber them as they were. And the buffet cars disappeared, and they were replaced by locomotive-hauled coaches of the same design that were modified to suit. They just found an open saloon, second class Mark 1, they call them, and installed the necessary electrical gubbins and the new interior, and you wouldn't know the difference really. Unless, of course, you looked at the little works plate on the side of the underframe, because sometimes that didn't tally, and that was a clue. Oh, amazing the rubbish you remember, isn't it? This model's made by Bachmann in China, of all places, far, far away from Kent. Funny, really, as Hornby, model train maker, used to be based at Margate in Kent. It would have been nice if they could have done it, wouldn't it? But alas, no. Even they are in China now. One thing is for sure, though, it is exquisitely detailed and runs very well. The number 50 on the front, from memory, meant Victoria to Ramsgate Express. Ramsgate being on the Kent coast, and it was their home depot for many years. We only got them down here in Sussex when they electrified the Hastings line in the early 80s. And everybody said, oh, we like these new electric trains, little realising that in some cases they were older than the diesel ones they replaced. It was the new interior. Fooled a lot of people, that did. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you again soon.